Hello, my name is Eli Marquez. I was in the United States Air Force. Uh, when I was in college, I was in the Air Force ROTC program, and I got my commission when I graduated. My first assignment was to Tucson, Arizona, to the 390th Strategic Missile Wing. I was what the Air Force called a missileer. I was a missile launch officer on a Titan II ICBM missile crew. There were 18 missiles in underground silos around the Tucson area. And my wife was assigned to the medical portion of that missile wing, as she just spoke about. The strangest incident while I was there in Tucson was one evening we received an emergency war order, and these are coded messages. Once we decoded the message, we were expecting it to just be a routine exercise message. As it turns out, this was an actual message. And the contents of the message required us to open the safe, take out the launch keys, insert the launch keys, and basically prepare to go to war. The Titan II missiles at that time were the largest ICBMs in the United States inventory. They were about 10 stories high. They were based on the Titan II booster, which launched the Gemini capsules into space that NASA used. And on top of our missile was a 10 megaton bomb. And it was the largest bomb that the US had at that time. We proceeded to carry out our orders. We opened the safe, inserted the keys, got everything ready, secured our launch control center, as we were supposed to, and we waited. And I'm not sure how long the wait was, but those were the longest minutes of my entire life. And nobody said a word. There were 4 of us in that capsule. It was a 4-man crew, 2 officers and 2 enlisted. What we didn't know is that at the same time we were doing all this, every B-52 in the country was taken off. What happened is that earlier in that day, at the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, the crew, well, let me explain about Cheyenne Mountain. Cheyenne Mountain is basically the watchtower of the United States. It gathers, receives input from radar sites, from satellites, and other sensors. And it tells the people there, the command crew, if there's an attack against the United States. The day shift crew had been running an exercise, and when they run an exercise, you close the communications lines going to the bomber bases, the missile bases, to the White House, to the Pentagon, and to the other command centers in the country. They finished their exercise and they opened up the communications line. At that time, the computer systems, they used tapes. And then scenario was on a tape. Somebody forgot to unload the tape, take it off the tape drive, and it just sat there. Later on, in that evening, somehow that tape drive was activated and it started running. And before you know it, the crew on duty saw a massive attack against the United States. You saw these indications of a missile attack coming in from the Soviet Union. And so the alert messages went out to all the bomber bases, the missile bases, and basically said, get ready to launch. Luckily, there were people at Cheyenne Mountain who realized that something wasn't right, that they were receiving indications of an attack, but none of the radars, none of the other sensors were reporting anything. So they correctly deduced that it was just bad. It was a computer malfunction. So it seemed like a long time. There we were in the Launch Control Center, and we finally got a message to stand down. And that was a collective sigh of relief, I think, throughout the country, from the bomber crews, from the missile crews, because we all knew if we had received the message to turn those keys to launch, that would have been the end of the world as we know it. So that was early on in my career. Later on, I was what was called a space and missile officer. I accepted an assignment to Beale Air Force Base in Northern California. And I was stationed at a large phased array missile warning radar. It was a 10-story high building. It did not have any moving parts. There were thousands of antenna elements on the face, and the radar was steered electronically by the computer. And that was back in the early 80s, and at that time, the space shuttle was still fairly new. And instead of landing in Florida, the space shuttle would land at Edwards Air Force Base in California. So when it was coming in for a landing, it had the same characteristics of a missile. And of course, we all knew it was a space shuttle, but we would get all the lights and the whistles that it was a missile. And but it was always fun to work a shuttle landing. Later on, after that, I was stationed at Shemya Air Force Base in Alaska. It was the second to the last island in the Aleutian chain. It was only 2 miles by 4 miles wide. Only contractors and military personnel were allowed on the island. After that, I went to Colorado, and I worked GPS operations, GPS satellite operations. And I was there the night that the first Gulf War began. At that time, GPS was not as robust as it is now. There were only 9 satellites in orbit, I believe, at that time. And one of the oldest satellites was still up there, but its solar arrays had been damaged by micrometeorites, and the batteries were not holding their full charge. So what we would do is we would baby it. We would turn off the satellite when it left the Middle East area. Then when it came back, when it was getting ready to come across the Middle East, we would turn it back on. And we did that through the entire war. Nowadays, GPS, I mean, it's in your cell phones and whatever, but back at that time, the GPS receivers were the size of a box, basically, about 10 inches by 10 inches. And there were not very many of them. The Army didn't have enough GPS receivers to send to all the troops. And of course, if you remember, the Army conducted that massive maneuver across the desert. We would receive letters from the troops asking their parents or their spouse to please go to the store and pick up a GPS for them and send it to them. That's how rare they were. But now GPS is just all over and everybody has one. But that's the way things were kind of back in the early 90s. And I worked headquarters, I worked Cheyenne Mountain. If you have ever seen Stargate, you see the entrance to Cheyenne Mountain Complex. And well, that's where I worked. When I would go into work, I would think about the tons of granite that were above my head. But it was something. And you know, if I had to do it all over again, I would be back in the Air Force because it gave me experiences that not a lot of people get to experience. You know, so that's it.